Hello and welcome to Mabinda TV. So for now, I'd like to look at the recent opposition polls. The recent polls by TIFA. So TIFA has President William Ruto leading by 24%. Then of course you have Kalonzo Musyoka following closely with 19%. Then you have Fred Matiang'i at 14%. And then you have Edin Sifuna at 10% and Gachagua at 9%. So basically, do you think the opposition will figure this thing out? Do you think the opposition will basically figure this thing out? I just think that basically the opposition needs to be united. If they hope to unseat President William Ruto, then the opposition must just be united. That's how we'll be able to. That's how they will be able to garner an opposition victory in 2027. Remember, if they stand united, that's a combined 76%, as Ruto has 24%. So that's a combined 76%. And I think if the opposition really wants to hack this thing, then they better unite. That's how, and then the opposition will be able to figure out that they can win the presidency comfortably. And I think President Ruto could be headed to be the first one-term president in Kenya. Kenya has never had a one-term president, and maybe President William Ruto could be the first one-term president. So basically, right now, I think the opposition needs to figure out how it can unite Kenyans. Remember, Ruto promised fuel prices to be low. Look at the current fuel prices. Diesel at 243, petrol at 214. The basic Kenyan cannot afford basically the Kenyan cannot afford the price of fuel. So why is this was a key campaign promise? Remember, for President William Ruto, it was about the bottoms up economic model. That was the premise of President William Ruto. Bottoms up, the mama mboga, the border guy, they were the real hustlers. But the hustler right now has not gotten the hustler is being hammered hard on the pocket. And so basically what we need right now is an opposition that can unite the sentiments of Kenyans. Of course, always Kenyans vote against rather than Kenyans vote against rather than for. This is why I would call on Kenyans to be able to rally around the opposition. Of course, President William Ruto, he is a very good campaigner. Basically, he says he will reduce the price of fuel, he will reduce the price of he will build this and this road. That is how President Ruto talks. He says work has begun on Rironi Road. But basically, the president must know that he is the campaigner, he is the commander in chief. But right now, he is on a campaign mode. When will he shift to be the commander in chief? That is what we must ask. And I think if that happens, then basically Kenyans will be able to shoulder around and then come around and support the opposition. So basically, the opposition look at the university funding model. It is basically in tatters. Our universities are bankrupt, and of course, that calls for President William Ruto to come up with specific measures on how he will be able to galvanize the country together, on how President William Ruto will be able to rule. Look at capitation for schools. The budget was reduced from 10,000 from 22,000. Right now it's at about 16,000. So basically, that means a lot of schools are having to send kids away, students away, to go back to their parents to bring in extra money. And of course, President Uhuru left it at 22,000. So why is President William Ruto reducing that to only 16,000? And basically, I think that could reduce even further, as of course the Treasury CS John Badi has said there will be no capitation. There will be the ministry is facing constraints in funding the free public. Free primary education and pre-secondary education. We need education. Education is a public good. Education is a public good and it needs to be free. Remember, equality of opportunity is all about making everyone start at the same starting lineup. That's what equality of opportunity is all about. And so, if equality of opportunity is making sure that every Kenyan is at the same starting lineup, then basically what we need to be doing is to be providing free public goods, provide free education all the way up to university. That's how you make people escape poverty. And I think if people escape poverty, then we will be able to train our students on the best available workforce so that then they cannot just be job seekers but also a job creator. So I think for President William Ruto, he will retain his base of Rift Valley. I'm not so sure about his base of that is Mount Kenya, but of course Mount Kenya looks to be split between Rigathi Gachagua and William Ruto, basically. And remember, Ruto was basically elected because of the Mount Kenya voting bloc. That is how President William Ruto was elected, because of the Mount Kenya voting bloc. And I think if things stand, he has lost about half of the support of Mount Kenya, that is President William Ruto, and that will be a very big gap to fill. Remember, there are about 10 counties that are majority Kikuyu, that is about 10 counties. So that is a huge, huge head start in any presidential competition. And I think if President William Ruto really is going to win a second term, then basically he has to win over the Mount Kenya. That's why I think this talk about the running mate coming from Nyanza, I don't think it is grounded on facts, because remember that the turnout in Nyanza will be very low because one of their own is not on the ballot. For the first time in many years, Raila Odinga's name will not be on the ballot. And so basically, you can expect that this will be a huge trend. So President Ruto is going to retain Professor Kithure Kindiki as his running mate, and I think if he retains Professor Kithure Kindiki as his running mate, then basically you can be sure that Mount Kenya, at least he can bag at least half of the votes, and then bag the other half maybe from the small tribes in Kenya. And I think maybe the thinking within President Ruto's circle is that President Moi ruled with not support with no support from the Mount Kenya. That is the thinking behind President William Ruto's sentiments, that if Moi managed to rule without the Mount Kenya votes, then basically he can also try and galvanize the small tribes so that he wins over. Of course, President Ruto won the election as an outsider, so it's going to be very hard to unseat President William Ruto as a president. Remember, he ran as an outsider. It was Uhuru Kenyatta as president supporting Raila Odinga, but that ticket did not manage to hand over the presidency to Raila Odinga, the right honorable Prime Minister Raila Odinga. So Ruto figures if he is already instead of things and basically ensure that he is going to be the one that is to be re-elected. Look at Kenya; it is on the brink of a takeoff. Kenya really has been on the runway for a long time. Every time our dream to take off is thwarted by so many forces. Every time our dream to take off is thwarted by many forces. And I think this is the time that Kenyans must be able to this is the time that Kenyans must be able to galvanize and basically elect a sensible candidate. Of course, the likely presidential candidate of the opposition will be, I think, Kalonzo Musyoka. He will be the likely opposition candidate. Remember, he could team up with Fred Matiang'i or Edwin Sifuna, or maybe Rigathi Gachagua, although of course the impeachment case against Rigathi Gachagua could stand in the wake of Rigathi Gachagua being impeached. So of course we don't know whether Kalonzo Musyoka, I think, could be the formidable candidate to take on William Ruto, but I just think then he will be able to choose a running mate maybe from Mount Kenya. But of course, the opposition bloc looks set to be able to make Ruto a one-term president. So, do you think President William Ruto will be a one-term president? So, you let me know in the comment section. Bye for now.